infrastructure leader Shankar Chandran here. I'm here to share with you the leadership capability matrix and its importance. I worked in companies like Hewlett-Packard, IBM and AT&T, and most of my core areas of expertise is in the management of infrastructure services. So just to give you a brief review in terms of how important these leadership skill matrix are. These days, most of the leaders that are in the industry are pretty much very focused in certain areas, and it's important that if you have to run a business, you have to have diverse skills. And how are you going to build those diverse skills? You'll have to go back and look at yourself in terms of what you possess, and then look at how the market is progressing, and then try to build skills in certain areas. So this is an example in terms of how I'm portraying my diverse skills based on the experience I've gained in the three offices of work. The first thing is the infrastructure services. As I told you, I work for companies like IBM, HP, and AT&T. Pretty much most of my experience comes from the area of infrastructure services, right? Pretty much managing server operations, network operations, and IT security. Server operations pretty much is all about how you manage the server. If you were the user and you're asking someone else to manage your server, what your expectations are would be performed by them. Like, creating user IDs, managing the availability of the server, and then also sizing the server so that your requirements scale, and then the scalability also is an option that's available. Similarly, on the network operations point of view, if you're talking about managing infrastructure, and then you have all the assets that's spread across different parts of the world, what are different ways in which the connectivity can be done? How do you manage that connectivity so that you're seamlessly trying to access those assets? And then connectivity to different people. And then last of all is the security aspects, the different ways you can protect the different assets, be it from the server or network, or the perimeter itself from being intruded by wrong people or by spam. Now I'm going to be sharing one example in this area in terms of how, as a leader, you would be able to leverage, on a real-time manner. So let's say you're talking about a large account which is beginning to outsource to your organization, right? And the scope of the outsourcing encompasses server, network, IT security, and so on. As a leader, you first have to look at what are the list of assets that encompasses in these areas, right? And then how are they spread geographically so that you can strategically look at positioning the operations in the different regions, because you have language considerations that comes into play. And then of course you have the ITIL process that comes in that encompasses how successful you run the business. So once you get the list of assets, the assets obviously are going to be classified either the server, network, or IT security aspects. And then once you get the list of servers, you're talking to different groups of people, either incident group or problem group or change group, to ensure that they are aware of these assets, and then the tool, the network tool, intelligent tool, that is going to manage this environment are successfully aware to discover these assets. And once you go back and do that, the network tool as such is able to monitor these servers, and then the people which encompasses the operations, the problem team or the change team, which are part of this whole group, are able to actually go back and manage this environment, right? So that's the whole suite of infrastructure service I was talking about in real time. And then we're talking about data center management, and that's the kind of large program that I did for IBM. I used quite a bit of my experience prior to it in delivering this program, right? So what is data center? Pretty much all the people who are in the IT industry pretty much have their hosted assets in one of the rooms, which is quite secure and which is quite with fantastic weather conditions. So we call that traditionally either the network room or we call the server room. If that's going to be commercially hosted with high availability and with quality of service in the area of air conditioning, electrical, and then of course a high level of perimeter security, and then offered it as a service, that encompasses data security service, data center management service. Now, why do you think this service is so important? Because every corporate and every leader at some point of time has to make a decision whether he's going to give away or spend his most expensive asset, which is his capital budget. right? Because once you spend your capital budget, you are probably going to run out of your healthy nature of your business is probably going to dip. You probably want to spend your expensive capital assets on the core business stuff and rather than spending it on data center, which is available as a service in the market. So in this data center project, right, I know I had to interface with multiple consultants, right, because we're talking about designing a data center which encompasses several characteristics, right, or a skill set. We're talking about someone who's really good in understanding the electrical requirements for this servers or hosted devices. And then we're talking about the environmental condition which encompasses the temperature and the humidity control that's required to run these assets. And third of all, is the design consideration of the perimeter itself. You're going to put huge tons of load in that hosted space, and you want to be sure that that space has enough structured capability to sustain that load. So we're talking about structuring engineering here. And then the last piece of it is about the perimeter security and the governance around it, right? So that's the key, because if customers are going to come back and is going to use your data center, they probably are going to put confidential data or their business impacted data on the server, and you better go back and be prepared to secure that, because that's going to be a key engagement in sales pitch that you are going to ask, and that's the key thing that the CIO of every organization is going to ask you if you're going to deliver the service. And then when the design considerations are, when you're working on the design considerations, and I'm especially working with consultants who are involved in designing, there is something called the ideal condition and there's something called a typical condition. The design consideration consultants who come back and offer you the first solution are typically based on what their previous experiences are. But you have a business value and you are coming out with a business proposition in terms of what you want to do. Now you better tell them in terms of what you want, right? Because if you don't do it, I'll quote an example as to where this is coming from. In a data center typical design, the local consultants actually look at all the specifications of the products available locally. But if you're talking about a rack example, typically the OEM racks from either Dell or HP or even IBM comes with sizable considerations of 600 by 1000 millimeters. But the rack that's typically available in the market by default is about 800 by 1000. You're losing about 200 millimeters of space if you don't even capture that into your design consideration. It could be a little aspect, but it's key because you're losing, for every rack you're losing 200 millimeters of space. But there's a flip side of it, right? Because as you cut down 200 mm of space in each of the rack, the quantum of rack increases. So you better have factor that in when you're computing the capacity management of electricity and air conditioning system. So those are the values that a leader who possesses data center sits down with these consultants trying to negotiate an ideal environment by which you're able to get a wonderful data center which can sell as a world-class product. And then your ability to program manage these consultants so that you don't miss out any kind of information that is offered by one consultant and your views are ideally factored in the design. And then of course a sequence of implementation that can actually move the product very quickly in the market. The longer you take, the longer your return of investment would be. And then your engagement philosophy, you've done the product and you're the best person to educate the salespeople. The features, the capabilities, and the pluses and the minuses. Of course, you want to probably show your minuses as plus. But then you will go back and work with the sales folks and the pre-sales engineers to go back and ensure there's a package that is put up, that is available for customers when they go back and interlock. And finally, the operational philosophies on how you're going to operate this data center in future once the build is complete, which encompasses how ideally you're going to maintain the security of the perimeter, and then what are the processes in the pre-boarding stage, and what are the various factors that you would consider if you have, like for example, if a customer is going to come in and say, I'm going to add a server. There's something called, your scheduling of work, and then the pre-boarding, and then we're talking about when the build is complete, and then we're talking about service migration. And then, so all these have to be pre-planned. You just can't allow a person to walk in one fine day and then say, I want this, I want to do this. No, that's not the idea here, because you're going to have multiple customers here. At the cost of convincing one customer, you're going to probably disappoint the customers. And then next, coming into the business operations. If you are a leader managing the operations, you actually have to know and be familiar in terms of what are the different aspects of the business operation that has to be controlled and managed to be successful in running a business. And that's the key that every leader should be very, very thorough with. For all the people who are going to be listening to this video, kindly focus on this if you're going to become a leader in future. We're talking about headcount caulking, right? We're talking about every company and every team may talk about 30 people, 40 people. But if you're talking about, if each of these people are going to be handling different projects, we better have a system in place to identify how each of these people are spending their time. I guess it is not about managing, provoking people's ego, about managing their time. No, it's not about that. It's about clocking time for how one's individual is spent, and then effectively using the time, time slots to build the respective project. So there is no ambiguity either from the people perspective or from the billing standpoint. So that's the key, right? And then we're talking about utilization monitoring. Every team, every individual in the organization would have to probably spend a few hours as per the labor conditions and the environment in a specific country. Let's take in this case, in this country, we spend about a minimum of about 160 hours, a month. If you're going to be doing that, we pretty much know whether this 160 hours was pretty much used to bring business return of investment, right? If there are 3 slots available, and if that 3 slots of 10 hours is available with an individual, and if that similarly is available with about 40 people, imagine what we're talking here about 40 people into 10 hours. Pretty much we're talking about 2 full heads, bodies that would be part of you. And you probably can invest that 400 hours probably in another project that could give you probably a profitability or increased revenue for your business. And then we're talking about the most expensive aspect of the business management, which is the seat utilization. You're going to be running an operation which is 24/7, right? So we have an overlapping features of about 1 hour. There are, in principle, we're talking about work-life balance as well, because that's the key that is catching up in the industry for employee welfare. So if you're talking about 15% of people who are going to be working from home and you don't have a system to manage it, there are going to be 15 seats that's going to be idle. And imagine if that practice is going to continue for the whole year, you probably are going to be you're losing out an opportunity of saving the cost of those 15 seats. Imagine the other aspect of it. If people are going to be working in a different time lag, and that for 16 hours, if that seat is probably empty, and if there's another business who actually works for a project in a different hour and that can leverage it, why not? That's the key. So those are the aspects that encompasses the business operation, and as a leader, you better one has to have a clear understanding in terms of what these are. And then the biggest piece of a successful leader is this interlock with the finance team, because they are the people who are actually going to keep track of how you're doing with respect to your recovery and your spend. Now, from the operations leadership perspective, right, you're talking about managing a group of people. How are you doing with respect to their title or the band rates? You cannot probably you have a project which is about 60 people, and you cannot have all the 60 people in the consultant level. Obviously, that's more expensive, and there was a better way of doing it, and that's gone unexplored. So you probably will have to go back and manage the band, the rate consideration. Number 2, the salary consideration of individuals is also increasing in the marketplace year on year. How are you doing with it? Because you actually designed the business 2 years back when the salary probably was 16% or 18% low. But subsequently in 2 years, the salaries increased by 18%. And if you're not going to factor that, then you probably are running into a negative return of investment. As a successful leader, one has to keep track of how you're doing the run rate. And then with respect to productivity, right? Yes, people are spending 200 hours, 160 hours a month on doing the job. But what was the resultant of the 200 hours? Did they handle 600 tickets? Did they handle 800 tickets? And if that's the quantum of work that they've done, what's the ideal condition? Let's take the best case situation and let's take the worst case situation and let's create an ideal scenario. And probably put that as a KPI and say this is an ideal scenario and everyone should probably look upon that, right? So that's the productivity part, and then the management, budget management. How are we doing with respect to the operational budget that was assigned to the business? Because you probably want to have that budget in hand for the whole quarter, for all 4 quarters pretty much. But if you spend all that in the early part of the year, you're probably going to run a freeze in the later part. That's probably going to disappoint a lot of people. So that is the last piece is the planning piece, because if you're talking about scalability of business, you pretty much have some money in hand to scale up your footprint into other segments of service lines that you're probably going to get into. And the next one is about mentoring, right? So most leaders think, yeah, I'm good at all this and I'm a leader. No, leadership is all about how much of skills you possess and how much you dissipate for the future's leaders, right? Because if you don't dissipate knowledge, you probably are going to have no succession plan, right? Every leader should have a succession plan, and for that you should share your knowledge. So which means you're talking about training and mentoring. The training could involve probably ITIL, a kind of strengths that you possess based on your operational skill matrix that you're talking about. But there are other things that are key in the industry, right? And I want to encompass, pretty much focus on innovation and leading with distinction. Most successful companies in the industry today are successful because of the huge pipeline of innovation that the people have got, indulged into. And the beautiful program that encompasses this innovation pipeline. Google is an example, right? And then we're talking about Amazon. They have a huge pipeline of innovation. Now let's look at the other side of the people. People always take a backseat when you talk about innovation and say, no, I cannot innovate. I don't think that's true. As a leader, you have to go back and motivate people and make them feel that yes, every individual can innovate, right? And then you need to put in place a governance system, how each of their thought processes are run through a program, through a set of processes, and identify those opportunities which can turn into valuable business values or products. I'll give you a simple example for people who have heard about telepresence. The product was, there was a leader who was running an innovation program, and the telepresence was as a service is available in a fixed environment. You have to go back into telepresence room, and you got to sit right in front of the system, and then it will take a copy. It will take a recording of yourself and as well as the remote, and then you interactively communicate. But there was a candidate who came back and said, with the next generation connectivity that is in place, 3G with 4G stepping in, and with Android system catching up in the system, and with apps taking the prima facie of driving the industry, why can't you have an apps-based telepresence system hooking on back into it, so you just go back and connect, you get authenticated, and then your telepresence starts. You get back into a room, you go back and use certain options, and it just transfers you back in live back into your room. Imagine for you it's an apps-based driven, but look at it from the business standpoint. The leader doesn't have to travel the 30 miles or 30 kilometers to get back to a closest premises to take that call. But obviously your return of investment is much better because the number of stations you need to have probably is reduced. So these are kind of innovation that everyone can do. I may have given an example of telepresence, but everything that is different that you think of is an innovation. And as a leader, you need to motivate people to come out with innovative thoughts. The last of all is solution in architecture, and this is where me as a leader actually engaged with salespeople who were actually struggling to sell the infrastructure services because salespeople go back and interlock with CIOs and CTOs, and they come back with very IT questions, and pretty much most salespeople don't have that skills, right? They come back with numbers, business follow-ups, that's the kind of skills they come with. It's important they also have a kind of cross-functional skills so that they as individuals can succeed in the discussion and win the deal. So I had interlocked with them to win a lot of deals. For example, in one of the data center contract, we went back and successfully actually signed off a contract with GE, even though the data center production go-live date was 5 weeks away. It was not about whether you had the data center live or not, it's about you trying to confidently talk to the CIO what you're bringing to the table and what the losses is, doesn't matter. If you're going to come back with your value proposition, probably that 5 weeks go-live date, which is the future, may become very small. So those are the kind of things that I've worked with the solutions team. And then pretty much on the standardization and migration, I worked on different portfolios, especially in the area of vendor consolidation or technical consolidation, trying to standardize the processes so that there's a standard handling procedures which makes it more efficient and finally relating to the productivity. And then we're talking about custom solutions because we're coming across unique environments with customers. And you'll have to look at it very uniquely. You can't look at everything in standard. Sometimes you have to look custom, and you better be prepared to handle the situation. So those are pretty much the kind of experience I've gained as a solution architect. So if you look at the 6 areas of my expertise skills that I've covered, I've built my skills in these areas with a lot of passion, and I'm telling you, every leader right in the industry need to diversify itself in the skills, and it's important they also portray this in a short video for all the future leaders to realize how important it is to build this area, right? So in summary, this has been my capability matrix in the following area. And for all the viewers who are looking at this video, I hope you have a great time with me, and you're going to focus on building your cross skills to become a successful leader in future. Thank you, and thank you for being with me.